Hello, this is Joe Trahan, welcoming you to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooton Foundation, whose mission is to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances. As the national leader on this subject, they communicate their educational messages through various methods, including this podcast. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the All Me podcast, everyone. I am your host, Brian Parker. Thanks for spending some time with me today for another episode. Today, we're going to keep the series going with our friends and partner, PBSCCS, or the Professional Baseball Strength and Conditioning Coaches Society. One of the things we do here at the foundation is try to inspire others to achieve their goals the right way. And one of the ways that we do that is through our Major League Baseball All Me Advisory Board, which is made up of players from across the league. PBSCCS is one of our partners that helps make that board happen. So it's been great to work together to inspire people, and this is why we've been teaming up to bring you a series of podcast episodes focusing in on a variety of different performance topics. In this episode, we're going to talk with Goldy Simmons. He is the Director of Strength and Conditioning for the Chicago White Sox. Goldy and I kick things off by talking about his background as an athlete, because he grew up with a dad that played in the major league, so that influenced him and eventually led him into strength and conditioning. We then dive into his topic of upper body training, and I talked to Goldy about why he wanted to discuss this topic, what muscle groups this entails, the skills that can be improved through upper body training, and how often you should focus your training on this area. We also spend time on why he views sleep as so crucial to your training, exercises you can do at home for your own program, and his thoughts about those that might be tempted by PEDs to achieve their goals. Goldy shares his knowledge and philosophy for performance and beyond, and even gets you a book recommendation at the end for some inspiration of your own. Thanks to Goldy for hanging out with us, and to PBSCCS for making this series happen. Time to hit the gym and hang out with Goldy for some knowledge. What's up, Goldy? How are you today? Welcome to the show.
Hey, Brian. How are you, man? I'm doing well.
Awesome. Glad to hear. Well, let me start with a little bit of appreciation and gratitude for your time. I know you got a lot on your plate, so thanks for doing this. I'm looking forward to it because this has been a really fun series. I've been talking to strength coaches at various levels from all across the league, and it's been great just to get to know some of you guys, learn more about you. Selfishly, that's been fun, but also the content has been awesome as well. There's been so many different topics we've focused on and information that I know will be useful to anybody that tunes into this, and I know that's going to continue with you. So thanks for giving us time and giving us some of your knowledge, which we're going to get to in just a minute. But I've been starting all these with a bit of an introduction on who I'm talking to. I just think that's kind of a logical place to start, right? Before they learn about some content, let's learn about who we're talking to. So let me start you off with that. A couple of questions to learn more about who you are. So let's start with some background on Goldy as a person. So this is obviously a broad question, but let's tailor it down to kind of some stuff we'll talk about today. So let us know a little bit about you, where you're from. I know you have some pretty good experience in the sport of baseball, so maybe let us know about that and when your kind of interest in strength and conditioning came into the mix as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Brian, thanks for having me. So born and raised San Diego, California. Went to school there, went undergrad, played at San Diego State under head coach Tony Gwynn. So pretty cool experience there. You know, just kind of a little bit about me. I think strength conditioning was something that for me was, you know, I think it was just kind of like who I wanted to be and kind of what I wanted to be a part of. And it kind of took, you know, going through, you know, some of different levels of baseball collegiately and professionally for me to really dial in and accept that, you know, this is kind of my calling and this is my path. And, you know, it's something that I wanted to do. If not, you know, making it to the major leagues as a player, it was always a goal of mine to make it to the major leagues, and some type of support for baseball. And you know, I've been blessed and fortunate enough to be with a great organization that, you know, respects, you know, the grind and respects me as a person and kind of allowed me to kind of flourish and become who I am today and what I am for the organization. So it's been awesome. But yeah, man, just early on, baseball was a passion of mine. My father played 22 years of professional baseball, so it was kind of a part of life for me, and it's in the bloodline. So it wasn't just, you know, one day waking up and like, oh yeah, you know, I'm gonna go swing a bat, throw a baseball. There's lineage there with my father, So it was something that early on sparked my interest as a young child, and just kind of watching my dad and kind of what he did on day-to-day basis. I saw both sides. I saw the on field, and I also saw the off the field. And for him, a lot of that was weight room specific. So early on, I was given doses of kind of what this is about, and I was in clubhouses, I was on the field, shagging fly balls during BP, like the typical professional athlete child story. So for me, this was just something that I grasped, and I studied it and got a master's in exercise science and physical education, and played at the collegiate level. Also played a couple of years at Chicago White Sox at the rookie level before returning back to school and finishing undergrad and getting a master's, and eventually getting a job with the Kansas City Royals in their Arizona League affiliate, and ended up getting an offer with the Chicago White Sox, and 9 years later here I am. So I know that's kind of a lot, but just kind of gives you a little bit of a historical background of myself and kind of where I'm at now.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's a lot. I kind of asked you to sum up your life in like 2 minutes. I think you did a pretty good job. It gives us, sets the table pretty well. A few things, I mean, I pull out from that. Number one, you're an Aztec. I'm sure that March Madness run was fun for you. I know it didn't quite get all the way there,
incredible.
But it had to be fun to watch.
It was incredible.
Yeah. Number two,
man,
I gotta imagine playing for Tony Gwynn was just such a unique experience. If anybody is a younger baseball fan listening to this and they have not watched him play, just go on YouTube and watch. Like the definition of a hitter, that's exactly who Tony was. The game is now so much about the long ball, and it's like man, I wish there were more hitters like him. I don't know if there'll ever be somebody exactly like him again, but just an unbelievable player. So I can only imagine what you learned from him while you're at school. And then go ahead.
Yeah, no, he's one of a kind. I think a lot of people would agree with me that to have somebody with that background, with that experience, that knowledge would be extremely hard to come by. So saying I was fortunate to be under his helm at San Diego State is an understatement. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, the mentors you've had in your life, him being one of them, but then just your dad too, right? Like you've seen this. It's almost it's all you known, right? And I feel like I've heard that story a couple times before. Some people will just be like, "Oh, I'm going the opposite direction of this," and then I've heard people like you that's like, "Oh, this is just what life is. I'm in it too, right?" And so and you did, and you jumped in, and you're still in it, and you played, and you're still in. It's part of the life, right? And it's kind of like that's the only life you ever known, and I'm sure I know it's one that you enjoy, and it's taking you to exactly to where you are now. I mean, I know that now you're the director of strength and conditioning for the White Sox at the major league level, which is awesome. And I know I've kind of seen you in action. You and I met in person last year. I've seen you in action, and you're crushing it in Chicago. And for those, probably have a pretty good understanding of what all that entails, but the last kind of background question I got for you in that position as the director, tell us a little bit more about your responsibilities. And I always kind of frame that question like this, even though it's a tricky way to frame it. What does an average day-to-day look for you? That's going to obviously vary depending on things that pop up, but what's on your plate, with what you are, and what are you doing when you wake up?
No doubt. So I'll kind of set the framework with kind of what like an annual calendar looks like to get to this point. So when people talk about, like the off season and, hey, it's time to relax, it's time to chill, there's actually more being done in the off season from like an administrative, from hiring, from, setting camps, getting with players, traveling, visiting players, talking to their coaches at home. There is no off season. Like you could almost just say like, what off season,
Right.
Because it's very demanding. It is very challenging because it's not only you working with, the players in the off season, you're working with, surrounding staff and surrounding frameworks and, putting different systems, altering different systems, to get ready for spring training, which is another, just it can be chaotic with the day to day. There's no days off, early mornings, late evenings, and the administrative and monitoring players. And so there's just so many different departments that, kind of collate into making a wholesome product for the organization, which is its player. And, just the day to day of doing that, you pretty much take all of that and you combine that, in this sort of like microdosed approach on a day to day basis with each player, with your surrounding staff. So, there's meetings in the morning to go over, what each player has, what they're doing, what they look like. We also have, sports science, integration where we talk about, how much high speed running they've had, what they look like on 4-6. And that all goes into program implementation and individualization, to make sure that, we're not giving too much on any specific day, and we're not giving, not enough on a specific day, just to make sure that they're kind of fitting that sweet spot when it's time to perform. So, it's a lot of administrative, meetings, talking, communicating with your coordinators, communicating with, your staff at affiliates, your supervisors, front office. There's also communication there, with, conversations if, when you're winning could be really, really good. And when you're losing or guys are getting injured can be bad at times, but, it's kind of the peaks and troughs of the system, and you just kind of have to play neutral and ride the wave as time goes on throughout the season. Cause, like we mentioned before this, it is a long season, and you just have to be willing and ready to ride the wave and, just be resilient enough to get through, 182, hopefully.
Yeah.
Whatever it takes to win a world championship. But yeah, there's a lot that goes into, being a director. Like you're ordering supplements, you're talking to surrounding staff, you're talking to players, you're assessing guys regularly, individualizing programs. There's a lot of stuff that happens, behind closed doors that, people don't see. And, when they see you just hit the stage, so to speak, at, 6-7 o'clock or whatever it may be, it just kind of seems like it's, it's all like, peaches and roses, and, you're out on the line with, these $1 million, fantastic athletes. And, there's so much more that goes on before the lights turn on at 7 o'clock, that most people don't realize. So yeah, it's a grind, but it's also very rewarding at the same time.
Yeah, there's a lot to it. There's a lot on your plate, which is one of the reasons I even appreciate you giving me an hour off of it. And then I know that I've been adjacent to, a lot of different professional sports organizations and employees a lot. And, I just don't, I'm not fully aware that people know how much goes into it. I think sometimes it's like, oh, so, you work for a baseball team, so you show up at 3 for batting practice and then the game's like, no, there's so much that goes into it. And like you said, oh, so when, the season's over, everybody goes home, takes a break. Nope, not even close. There's no such thing as, like you said, an off season. If you're in college athletics, there's no summer break. Break is not a term, right? The days are different, but
Right.
the plate stays full, which I know there's a lot to it, which I wanted to give our listeners some insights so they know, the commitment that goes into all this as well, which is, again, sets the table really, really well for us to dive into one of the topics and one of the things that you do work on with your players, right? Because in this podcast, what we're doing with each of you is really pulling out something in the world of strength and conditioning, in the world of performance, and really focusing on it. Because, as you just alluded to, if we just talking about your program as a whole, we could be here for a long time talking about everything that you do.
No doubt.
So your topic that you and I are going to chat a little bit about is upper body training. And before we dive into what that means to you, what that looks like, how does that play out, give me a little bit of insight, because I'm curious myself. Why was this a topic that you chose? Why is this something that you wanted to discuss today?
I just feel like with the integration of technology, we become so very heavily focused on the lower extremity, right? Like high speed running, hamstring strength, quad strength, adductor strength. And I feel like sometimes the upper body for the professional athlete specifically gets overlooked. It almost becomes like a misnomer, especially if you're not a pitcher. It becomes something that's just a part of the athlete and not something that kind of aids and drives performance. So for me, it was just like, I think this is something that, should be given a deeper dive, and something that, all professional, strength coaches and, collegiate strength coaches, should really pay attention to a little bit more. I know there's a lot of people out there that do it really, really well. But again, with this being an overhead sport, a sport that involves, that rotational, the flexion of the upper torso is something that is very interesting. And again, if it's something that is overlooked, can be very problematic for not only a team, but an entire organization. So,
Yeah.
In a nutshell, it's just something that's interesting. And I think it's an important topic to discuss.
Yeah, it's getting pushed to the side a little bit. Well, let's change that. We'll bring it to the forefront right now. Let's chat about it a little bit more. Probably the most obvious place to start is I think this is a straightforward question. You tell me if I'm wrong, but let's define what you mean by upper body. So if I'm looking at my body right now, where does that start? Am I including core in this, or like what muscle groups are we talking about here?
Absolutely. And I think you hit it on the head. I think one of the most important pieces to the upper body is the core, right? And we talk about, a lot of what we see in biomechanics is force generation from the ground up. Your core, you could almost argue, is kind of like the nucleus to power translation force production, right? So if I'm talking specifically about the upper body and its importance, your core is one of the most important pieces to your body, right? Because it interconnects, your lower half and your upper half. So to me, when it comes to training the core muscles, the external obliques, the rectus abdominis, those are things that we pay extreme attention to on a day-to-day basis. And it's hammered often in individualized programs for certain guys. Because it's part of what we do, right? All we do, we rotate. Yep. And one of the ways to stabilize rotation is through your core, right? So making sure that guys have, appropriate doses of anti-rotation stability, flexion power, rotational power is extremely important in the game of baseball. And then, as we travel up the kinetic chain, we're looking at, the pecs, the delts, the serratus, the traps, everything that kind of helps protect and assures that the shoulder is in a good position to be an overhead athlete. So, there's various ways that, we train that everybody's different. Everybody has their own methods of going about training the upper body. But I would just say, like, in a nutshell, making sure that, your stabilizers stabilize, your power generators generate power, and just making sure that you're able to, from a strength standpoint, withstand the forces that you generate from the ground up when it comes time to execute, whether that's, swinging a bat or throwing a baseball.
Yeah, I think that's good to clarify and get kind of set everything up, because sometimes people might hear upper body and just think, all right, so we're talking biceps and pecs here, right? And like just arms and shoulders, right? But I know how crucial the core is. And I wanted to make sure that was something we were including in this conversation, because I know so much movement starts with that. So that leads us down the path. Now that we know in what body area of the body we're focusing on, let's talk a little bit about upper body training as a whole. And one of the first questions I got about that is kind of sport specific, knowing the space that you're in, which is baseball. I'm curious, like, if you put together an upper body training program for one of your players, what are kind of the skills that you're hoping to develop as a result, right? So what are we hoping translates onto the field as a result of upper body training? I think, like, most people would assume power is one of them, and you kind of already alluded to that, so I'm sure that's one of the things, but I know there's more to it than that. So what are some of the skills that can be translated from a program that focuses on this part of the body?
Right. So, like, first, we like to think of, in the sport of baseball, like, what are the important concepts, right, that derive, optimal performance in the sport of baseball. So baseball is linear, vertical, and rotational power, right? And you could argue for pitchers, horizontal power is also another key component to training. So I think within those confines, there's various methods and ways to enhance those specific attributes with athletes. And just for us, like, if we wanted to, we talk about that rotational component, right? There's a lot of things that we would do to enhance rotational power, but we always like to default to strength before power, right? If you don't have this enough strength to withstand the forces that you generate, that's a recipe for injury, in my opinion. So we always want to make sure that, we're stable, we're strong, and then we can execute, the power and force, that we generate based on our physical makeup and expression. So, if there's somebody that's lacking, rotational power, we want to make sure that, like we talked about before, that core is strong and stable to begin to execute a program that is going to involve, rotational power, the use of med balls and cables and Kaiser equipment, things that kind of provoke a certain output, so to speak, and making sure that, these guys are just, ultimately strong and stable enough to express, whatever their body is willing to execute. So yeah, I definitely think there's different ways to go about, training, the upper body, different methods. Everybody's got something different, but, we like to utilize the triphasic method, just making sure, because that'll put you in the optimal position, to express, right? So first, we like to train isometrics and eccentrics, and then eventually concentrics, and then get guys moving and express, that optimal power output. So there's certainly different methods. I mean, we don't have to sit here and hammer them all now, but yeah, I mean, it really just goes back to those aforementioned attributes, linear, vertical, and rotational power, which we have assessments that give guys kind of their blueprint of where they need to start and kind of an end goal based on, what we prescribe to see the end goal enhanced, which is optimal expression of power output when they're performing, so.
Right.
If we see different flags, we'll attack those based on their expressions.
Yeah, I mean, I already knew that you're developing a program that you hope translates into something on the field. It's not just strength training just to do it, right? There's a reason why you're putting together the movements and the programs and what it might be. And I was curious, what are you looking for as a translation? What are you hoping to get out of it, right? And that was, a lot of detail there, but I think it does make a lot of sense in regards to that sport and what the end goal there is. One of the things I pulled out from what you just said is strength and power are two different things. It's like that's a good little wise mantra that people could go by, because I think people put those two together a lot, but they're related, but they're not exactly the same idea. So a good little nugget that people could pull out from what you just said. And let me stick with what you were just talking about for one more question a little bit, because you're talking about how that upper body movement and the programs can be different for everybody, which, yeah, I mean, everyone I've talked to in this series has said the same thing. So all the programs are individualized at this point because every single person is different. But if I'm looking at upper body movement as a whole for a baseball player, regardless of what you're trying to translate or get out of it or work on with a specific person, are there also things that you avoid? And I asked this question mainly because I was talking to Derek, works for the D-backs, and he was telling me that, like, our program, actually, we don't do anything overhead because we're worried that could actually do more harm than good. Like, is that an example of how, something you would not do for the sport of baseball that maybe your average person would do if they're doing their own upper body training?
Yeah, that's a great point. And not that that's bad or anything, but I do think, we have to remember too, like, this sport is very vertical in nature, as we expressed before. So completely eliminating anything overhead would, in my opinion, would be kind of a misnomer. I think the way that you go about doing certain things overhead, like we do a lot of landmine presses, right? You could argue that's another vertical push, so to speak, where guys are, going over their head technically, but they're just doing it in a proper manner that, refrains from injury predisposition. So, and then there's so much more that goes into that, shoulder health, scapular health, making sure guys have appropriate, ranges of motion to execute overhead, skills relative to their positions. So for me, there's not a whole lot that I would avoid. I would say in your coaching, you just make sure that you put athletes in the best position to execute a specific exercise to refrain from predisposition to injury. Now there's a lot of stuff that you see on Instagram that, of course, you're like, no, I'm not gonna put our athletes, on a Bozu ball and do something ridiculous, have them doing overhead press or something on a Bozu ball or something ridiculous like that. Like that's just it's just asinine. But I would say if I had to choose something that I would eliminate, would be just having guys doing dips, stuff like that. Anything that puts the shoulder in a compromised position, we try to refrain from. But, outside of that, we do a lot of like loaded carries, with, the position of kettlebells or dumbbells, near or sometimes, just above the head, just to make sure that guys have, some type of strength in that position, because it is an overhead sport. But I think, again, it just goes back to proper coaching and making sure that you put athletes in the best position possible to execute that initiative.
Makes sense. I mean, Goldie, I can't believe you don't use Instagram as your training guidelines. You're missing out on
Yeah.
A lot of people do that, though. I mean,
Instagram, right?
that's just what's on social media must be true. So some people will just take that as knowledge. Oh, I'll try that out. It's I'm relieved to hear that that's not. I knew it wasn't, but that's probably not what you're going off of on an everyday basis, which is good. Let me connect the dots on the last part of this little process, because I'm talking a lot about what you're doing with your players, and then we'll switch over to kind of the average person and a little bit of upper body training of their own. But to finish the time frame of what you're talking about here and this process. All right. So these are the skills that can come out of upper body training. Here's some of the types of movements that we're doing. Here's what we're hoping to get out of it. How long does it take for that process to play out? And this is probably going to be different depending on who the person is and how long they've been doing it and what the true end goal is. Right. But let's go back to, let's say, like rotational power is something that you're really working on here. How long do I need to work with you in the weight room before I start seeing that play out on the field? Or is that truly just such an individualized answer that you can't tell me? It's going to depend on the person? Or do you know, like, I can get this done in X amount of time?
Yeah. And I hate to give you this answer, but again, it just depends, right? Like, it depends on training age, the athlete's physical attributes, and then again, position specific. And then, one thing that, I feel like, we often overlook is learning styles, right?
Yeah.
Like, is this individual somebody that, learns kinesthetically? Like, do you have to physically show them? Are they an auditory learner? Are they a visual learner? Because a lot of that is going to translate into how well or how fast they adapt to a given stimulus, right? So one athlete might take them a week of executing a certain exercise before they get a feel for it, and then they're executing this in performance, right? Another athlete, it could take them a month and a half before we start to see signs of an upright trend in trajectory and learning this expression. So it really depends on the athlete, training age, and then their learning style, which as a coach you kind of have to blend all of those those attributes into kind of like this teapot and kind of find the best way for that athlete to learn and expedite that process. But again, too, like, sometimes the fast responder is not always the guy that's going to hold on to these attributes. You might have to reteach this again, whereas the individual that it took a month and a half, this is going to carry with them forever, right? So it's kind of like this. It's an interesting concept when it comes to learning and being able to express and see the results for certain athletes. But again, it really does depend, and it just goes back to who they are and what they look like and how they express certain attributes in training.
Yeah, learning style is probably one of those things that even I wasn't thinking about too much, but it makes total sense. I mean, you just look at schooling as a whole, like, right? Like, every kid in class, you could tell them all the same information, but not always going to hit the same way because people learn in different ways, right? So it's the same thing, in a program. It's, how do I adapt to who this person is and what they're hearing from me and make it all work, which makes a lot of sense. And obviously timelines being different for each person makes sense too. I'm sitting here thinking about myself. Like, if I started a program with you and your first round draft pick started a program with you, I'm a bet they pick it up quicker than I do, right? So that's just a little bit of nature, which makes sense. And I also think that does a good job of kind of pushing us into the next couple questions, which is where I can start to take some of this knowledge and apply it to really anybody that's listening to this in a couple different ways. And I want to start with upper body training as a focus, because I've seen this. I'm sure you've seen this too. And I'm actually curious where you stand on this, right? But I maybe this is old school thinking. I always kind of heard growing up when I was working out and doing some weightlifting and things like that, that you should alternate muscle groups. Like Tuesday should be your upper body day, Wednesday your lower body day, Thursday your core day, Friday your rest day. Is that still kind of how it plays out, right? Like, should I do upper body on certain days, or are you at the point now where it's like, no, kind of cross train, do a little bit of everything, maybe switch up the muscle groups, but you don't have to switch up the entire half of your body? How does that? What's your opinion on that? Like, when should I work in upper body? When should I rest it? If that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'll just start by saying, like, over the last couple of years, we've kind of adopted this kind of like this microdose approach, right? Where, we have athletes do just a little bit of something every day just to help, prepare and get them activated and potentiated to execute on the field. So as long as throughout the course of a week, you make sure you touch all movement patterns in all directions and all planes of motion, I think you're safe, right? And then, just making sure that you apply, an increased stimulus, an increased intensity, along the way. I think you put your athletes in a pretty good spot. But I wouldn't say there's one way over the other when it comes to picking, certain body parts. Like we have individuals that come in, and they'll do just a total body, where they come in and they touch a little bit of all muscle groups, on a micro level. And then we have guys that come in that maybe need, a little more focus in a certain area, and we'll make sure that there's added volume and progressed intensity over time to enhance that specific, body part, right? So they're you can split things up and say, hey, today, you're just going to work on upper body push, right? That would be, like your bench press, your push-ups, or, on the other side, we say, hey, we're going to work on, your back, right? So we're going to do a lot of upper body pull in all planes of motion, just to make sure you enhance, the qualities necessary. But again, as long as you're making sure, you're balanced, you're
Right.
making sure you're touching all body parts throughout the course of a week, or the course of a block, I think your athletes will be in a pretty good spot. Now, I wouldn't say like, letting a guy just come in and just hammer biceps all day is
Oh, sure.
like
It
that
happens.
wouldn't happen. It's not functional. It's not functional, right? Like
Yeah.
the bro science stuff doesn't really happen in baseball, or it shouldn't. But yeah, just making sure everything's functional, balanced, and all pieces of the puzzle, so to speak, are being put together throughout the entirety of a week.
It's good to know, yeah, because I kind of figured that might have been a little outdated thinking to just alternate it. That makes sense. I mean, honestly, from what I'm hearing, what's just more important is make sure you're getting everything right. Make sure it's balanced, because I do think, and I've probably been guilty of this too. Like, people will sometimes, if they're not a pro athlete, the upper body gets a little bit more focused, right? A little bit maybe vanity lifting goes on, right, and some other things get
Right.
ignored. So just don't ignore anything.
Yeah.
It's probably more important than the timing of when you're actually hitting stuff,
Exactly.
which makes sense.
No
And then
doubt. And
yeah, if you can elaborate if you want.
no, I mean, I was just going to say too, like if you find an athlete coming in, in the weight room and, just trying to check a box, and they are just coming in there trying to hammer certain things, that could be an indicator as a coach, like something's going on, in a specific body part. So also pay attention to that too. If you do have the athlete that's coming in there and he's just touching the same things over and over again, and he's kind of eliminating using certain pieces of his body or her body,
Yeah.
Definitely, take note of that and ask some questions, because that'll give you an indicator if something's going on with certain athletes. So we see that all the time. Certain guys come in and they try to avoid certain exercises. And sure enough, they're sore or something's going on, or they felt something during the game. And, it's a sure sign that something's going on. They're not going to tell you, right? When a young guy's making, 800,000, like he's not going to tell you that he's got something going on, right? I just need to not touch this and I need to play, right? Which can ultimately make things worse in the back end for you, as a strength coach or physical therapist or whatever it may be. So yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting.
keep eyes peeled. I mean, I would imagine that avoidance or ignoring something may work that day, but it's not going to in the long run, right? So that's where
No doubt.
your training is going to come in and be like, oh, I can spot something's going on here, which is just awareness for anybody that's listening that deals in these kind of settings. It's a good follow up to that question as well. And then my last follow up to that question, just to stay on that frame of average person listening doing their own upper body training, let's give them a little bit of advice, because look, there's going to be people listening to this that just don't have access to a White Sox type facility, right? And some people are working at home, whatever that setting might look like. What are some exercises that you recommend for at home upper body training? I know people are going to think push-ups is one of them, and that might be what you tell me, but are there other ones that you can tell really anybody listening that they could do that could work in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we all got a little bit of experience with this in 2020.
Sure.
With the COVID scenario, everybody had to learn and adapt to doing things at home, trying to provide a stimulus that, you were used to getting in a gym that you had to create at home, right? So I mean, I'll go on a limb and say, in its simplest form, just doing variations of push-ups, doing variations of pull-ups and rowing and just pulling things, and just get creative. Like if you're not a gym rat, so to speak, and you like to do things in private at home, like it could be as simple as getting some resistance bands and pushing and pulling on resistance bands. Like simple is effective. So for those that don't have the strength to go, and they don't feel confident about going to a gym, and where guys are pushing 120-pound dumbbells, I mean, you can get a lot of great results from just expanding your volume with push-ups. Something simple, doing body weight work. I encourage that for the young athlete. Just get accustomed to moving your own body for now. The weights and loaded forms of training will come. But I think it's very important, especially for, the young and the novice with a very low training age, to just get accustomed to moving their body in space. And, that starts with, doing things as simple as, body weight squats, or, whatever it may be, push-ups, pull-ups, just getting accustomed to moving your own body weight first before you go to adding, a different stimulus on top of, the body weight you're carrying.
Yeah, I think it's good to hear that it doesn't have to be too complicated. I mean, that question was even a bit selfish for me, because I'm one of those people. Obviously, like COVID hit, I'm working out in my house, and ever since then, I've stayed. I used to go to gyms, and now it's like I work out in the same room that I'm talking to you in right now. So it's nice. It's nice just for me to hear, like, I don't have to be that elaborate, right? Like I can just keep do some body weight stuff, keep it simple, and still get some results and some of the stuff I'm looking for, which I think is helpful for anybody that tunes into this, which was one of the things I wanted to focus on. And then the last part of my talk is where I have some overlap with all of you in this series that I'm talking about, because I want to really reemphasize the importance of a couple different things. And I know you're already on the same page with me, but I want to give people your thoughts on it as well. But because we're talking a lot about training, and we're talking a lot about conditioning and strength, and all those things are important. But I personally don't think that happens if there aren't a couple other things in play. And I know you agree. And the things that I have been pulling out that I want to get your thoughts on are nutrition and recovery. Those two things I just don't think can get you anywhere if you're not focusing on those as well. So what do those things mean to you? How much are you working in nutrition plans, rest plans with the guys alongside upper body training, whatever it might look like? I imagine that's got to be crucial on your end too.
100%. It's actually one of the most, if not the most important concepts, is sleep and nutrition, right? Like if you're talking about building yourself on a foundation, your sleep and nutrition is that bottommost foundation, and you want that to be the most robust and resilient piece of your body. Your sleep enhances recovery, and your nutrition enhances recovery, put you in a good spot for the next day. I mean, I would go on a limb and say that your sleep is the most important thing for not only professional athletes, but for just general population in its own right. Like if you're not sleeping, you're not recovering from yesterday's work, and eventually that's just going to compile over time, and eventually your body's just going to break down and you're not going to be who you once were when you first started training. So we've had several talks about sleep and recovery and nutrition, because this is, if you're looking at the body as like a pyramid, that bottommost layer is your foundation of the most critical components to, optimizing performance. If you're not sleeping, if you're not recovering, if you're not optimizing nutrition, you're moving around on a false foundation, right? Which is going to crumble at some point, a lot sooner than others would, that are actually getting sleep and resting and optimizing nutrition. I can't stress it enough. Like, we want our athletes, to sleep as much as they can. So much so that, we've embarked on starting Oura rings and whoop bands and just monitoring just how well guys sleep, because that sets the tone for the day. Like, nothing else matters until we understand how well these guys recovered. How long they slept, the latency of sleep, the REM sleep, the cycles of their sleep. We try to monitor all of that, because if they wake up on a false foundation, like trying to execute things in the weight room or training room and on the field, it's just all going to go to waste. And they're not really going to be expressing their true selves out there when it comes time to perform. So yeah, I couldn't express it in any more. The importance of that is just, it's pivotal.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And that's what I just try to get people to hear all the time. Like, what's the order of priority here, right? And I look at it like this. You could have someone come to you, one of the best strength and conditioning coaches in the country, but if let's say they showed up on 4 hours of sleep and skipping breakfast, it doesn't matter what you're going to do with them. It's not going to matter, right? It's not going to work, because they're just not setting the table before they ever showed up in the gym, right? So that order, I think, is crucial. I even like you hearing how putting sleep at the top. That's refreshing for me, because I love sleep. I struggle to get up in the morning. So now, next time, like, my wife tries to get me up, I'll say, look, Goldy told me I had to sleep X amount. He said it's the most important thing in my life. So I'm blaming you from here on out when I want to sleep in. How about that? So it's refreshing and it's important. And that's why I've tied it into all these discussions. And the last thing I'm gonna tie in is something that ties into what we do, because I know you're aware of us, because you and I met at the White Sox play campaign last year, and at those things I do a little bit of 10-15 PED talk to some of the kids about steroids and some of that stuff, and that's obviously our mission, and I think it does tie into all this, because we're talking a lot about performance and physical goals here. And what happens is, as we just stated, it takes a lot of work. There's a lot of things that go into making those goals happen. And so what happens is, sometimes you get people who don't want to put in all that work, or they're looking for a shortcut, or they're looking for an edge, and it can tempt people into PEDs as the answer. So for anyone out there that's considered that, or looking for an edge or a shortcut through something like that, what's something you want to tell them, or a message that you want to leave them with?
Yeah, just be you. Anything that artificially enhances your performance is a no-go, and it's not sustainable. It's, to me, the use of PEDs, one, you're doing, the people around you a disservice. You're doing yourself a disservice. And ultimately, from a physical standpoint, you're giving your body a false perception of its actual capabilities, from, a bioavailability standpoint. So when you alter your body's original method of functioning, you're going to leave yourself in a bad position, because that's not sustainable over time. And I'm sure, we've witnessed, those individuals who have utilized, PEDs, and you look at them, 10 years from now, and you can tell that their body is just not able to produce, like it once did, because you artificially, gave your body a false perception of its capabilities. And, eventually you'll just fall apart, so it's not sustainable. But, I just think there's an integrity component there. God kind of put you on this earth to be who you are, and just express yourself, authentically. And when you start to stray away from that, bad things happen. We are who we are for a reason, and, doing things to to put yourself above your peers from a physical standpoint is just not the way to be. And again, I'll just continue to say, like, it's not sustainable. And at the end of the day, you're doing your body a disservice because it's just a false perception of your actual capabilities. So yeah.
There's a couple of great takeaways out of that. Number one, the integrity piece is like, I tell people, like, you're going to really struggle to live with that choice because you're going to deep down know, like, I didn't really fully accomplish this on my own. I had some help. Even if people don't know that's what's going on, like, it's tough, right? Like, it's tough to live through that honestly,
Absolutely.
And transparently,
Absolutely.
which is part of it. And then, the second part you talked about, I think people don't connect those dots as much as, like, look, sometimes we see people that maybe using this and in the moment it's helping them reach their goal, but then we don't ever circle back and see, look at that person in a decade later and what they're living with as a result. Because you're right, like, the cost is heavy and the cost stays with you. So you gotta look long term here. You can't just look at what it's getting you in the moment. There's something coming on the back end, and I think people got to remember that too. So those are great takeaways and tie togethers for everything that we're talking about, and I really think it's important for anybody tuning in. And that was really my last big question to keep this all together. Actually, I'm gonna lie to you. I'm gonna throw two more questions at you that I didn't send you that have absolutely nothing to do with upper body training whatsoever. You're my last one of these series. So I interviewed 4 strength coaches, and I'm asking them 2 very quick hitter questions to see what level of overlap I'm getting here. So I got 2 real fast ones for you before I let you go. All right. So here's your first one. Because all of y'all have, like, pretty amazing facilities with lots of equipment, but I actually want to strip that away from you right now. So let's say that you got to start your own gym, or let's say I'm starting my own gym, a home gym, right? And I gotta go to the store. I gotta pick out one piece of equipment, but my budget's pretty strapped. I only got the money to buy one thing to get me going. What's the one piece of equipment that you would buy that you think is the most versatile that I should start with?
Kettlebell.
All right, I'm 2 for 2 on that. So that's
yesterday.
Casey from the Blue Jays, he said kettlebell. So I got a 50-50 split. The 2 of y'all said that, and 2 of you said power blocks was where you were starting, right? So
kettlebell.
All right, I'm digging that. I've seen full hour-long workouts with nothing but kettlebells, so that makes sense in my mind. So I'm liking that answer. And here's your last one, because all of you live in the sport of baseball, and so I want to see where your answers overlap here. So tell me what your favorite baseball stadium is that you've ever been in. And I'm not going to limit you to major leagues because I know you've been in most of those, but I'm going to include college for you, minor leagues, international, whatever. But if I say baseball stadium, what's the first one that comes to your mind?
And I know it's a tough environment, and there's a lot of people that may disagree with me, but New York, man, when you go to the Yankee Stadium, I mean, it's the historical perspective when you get into that place is unbelievable. Just what they've done, and they have like a museum in center field where you can go and you look at there's like a Steinbrenner plaque, and then around him is all the surrounding Yankee greats, and you go out there and just the history behind just being a Yankee is paramount, man. So I'm gonna go, even though it's a tough atmosphere to play in during the game. When the game's not happening, there's so much history in that place that you become a sponge of information. You get to learn about certain players. It's one thing to see these guys on TV for years as a kid, but then to go and just learn about who they were and their accolades and their accomplishments, with that, quote unquote museum that they have in center field is awesome. I mean, it's awesome.
I'm with you.
I can't say anything.
I like that you went with the historical angle of baseball and kind of how that plays into the mix. I ended up actually getting 4 different answers to that question. I had four very different, unique answers. Yesterday, Casey was Miller Park, or actually, if that's not what they call it anymore, but it's always Miller Park to me. But that's because he grew up in Wisconsin, so it's a homer answer on that one. Then I got Oracle in San Francisco from your boy Logan, which I'm with. I mean, it's hard to beat that setting on the bed. It's just a beautiful spot to watch a game. And then Derek, my first one, actually agreed with me on my favorite stadium, and that's PNC in Pittsburgh. I'm guessing you may have been there, but to me, man, walking that bridge, the skyline in the back. It's a beautiful place to watch a game.
Yeah.
No wrong answers, but I like that you all kind of went different angles with it. I think it's fun to overlap. And it's fun for me just to do these talks, man. I mean, Goldie, truly, like, it's fun to get to know you even more. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and taking the time amidst everything else going on in the middle of the season. Not only me have learned something here, I know everybody else tuning in will as well. So keep up the great work. You're doing a great job, and thanks for taking part of that job time to hang out with us. We do truly appreciate you sharing the knowledge.
Awesome, man. Anytime I can be a servant of information. And, I like to let people know too, like, I'm a sponge, and I don't talk a whole lot, like, in person. You'll probably hear this from, my peers. I'm pretty reserved unless you get me onto like a podcast, something like this, but I'm a sponge, man. I also like, this is as much as, I try to educate. I love to learn. So I'm a listener first. Anytime anybody has any ideas, thoughts, I'm all ears. So I love that I'm able to get on something like this. And, maybe if someone has any critical feedback to anything I said, I'd love to hear it. Because at the same time, I think just being a student of your craft always is very important. So
I don't have any critical feedback, man. I'll just apologize for making a non-talker talk for an hour, but I think it was worth it, man. Thanks for talking with us and share the knowledge. Let's do it again soon, my friend.
Awesome. If I can leave, you had question number 14 here. You did have, if there's, for anyone listening that wants to improve their performance, just something like a tip to pass along.
Sure.
I would just say, be a listener, be a very good student, be open ears, read, educate yourself, do your research. And with that, typically when I do podcasts, I like to leave the listeners with a quote or a really good book that I've read that I find of increased value. Right now, my lady actually gifted me a book this off season, and it's by Alan Stein Jr. It's called Raise Your Game, and there's just so many good nuggets in this book to really just enhance yourself as not only a performance enhancement specialist or whatever you want to call yourself, strength coach, but just as a human being, man. There's so many just knowledgeable pieces, and it's got a lot of really great athletes in there that share their thoughts and values based on their connection with Alan. So if you get a chance, go ahead and snag that book, Raise Your Game by Alan Stein Jr. It's a game changer for sure.
I will actually put a link to that in the show notes so people can pull that up and gain even more knowledge for it. Thanks for throwing that out there. Look at you. You're not a talker, and you even give us some bonus knowledge there at the end, man. I don't know if I believe you, but I appreciate that. It's a great place to leave it. I'll leave that in the notes. So I'll put your information on there as well. If anybody's got more questions for us, they can reach out. But thanks for being a part of this series. It's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of great knowledge that I know people will help, get to their physical goals the right way. And that's really what you and I are both about. So thanks for the help. And I hope we get to cross paths in person again soon, Goldie.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thanks, Brian.
Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooton Foundation, a nonprofit organization leading a national campaign to enlighten people to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances and inspiring people to live and compete without the use of these substances. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and tune in to our next episode.